Agini cor, an gédal sias is minlam, trisliu le arcan amanastrach an medatoshe de yano con cuivna con eticula cor cun cian, agus a gohoirehe le agar hori an laur tavachtak nusha, an balio con tavachtak sha, an na holiunia Declan Kiberd and P.J. Mathews. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to launch this important new publication, for which I was honoured to provide an afterword, the Handbook of the Irish Revival. It is an inspiring collection of the writings of the periods 1891 to 1922, a collection which invites us to reflect on the context, scholarship, and courageous expressions that gave voice to the demand for and the emergence towards what was envisaged as a new Ireland, perhaps self-ruling, possibly autonomous, even independent. The Handbook of the Irish Revival, with its commentary across 16 sections of gathered prose and poetry, allows a unique insight into a time of immense change for Ireland. Some of these changes sourced within the Irish experience itself, but very significantly influenced by the great changes that were taking place in Europe and the world. This immense wave of change, as seen through the concerns, the opinions, and the diverse visions of an inspirational group of men and women, are what is summarized and the subject of comment in this book. The contributors, as you have heard, includes literary figures, political activists, social theorists, educators, journalists, and religions. Many, of course, fill several of these categories and cross these categories. But the pens of those who wrote thus evoked an Ireland caught between the crumbling of old empires that would go to war with each other and the new and growing impulses to democracy. And any simple glance at the list of contributors serves too as an impressive reminder of the great ferment of vision, energy, and imagination that filled those decades that preceded the emergence of the Ireland we inhabit today. The questions and dilemmas they faced were myriad as they pondered the direction in which their differing versions of what a new Ireland might be or should travel, not least as to whether that Ireland should renew itself through a reclaiming, a reinvention, or an appropriate mythological construction of its past, or through a brave marching forward towards a path yet to be walked, or further, whether it was to be concerned with the task of imagination, as those such as Yeats would see it, or to focus on a more pragmatic adjustment to the pressing issues of the day, issues of survival, this latter being the road ultimately less chosen. Permeating each page of this book is a vibrant sense of possibility, a great desire to encounter and engage with the full spectrum of human possibilities. Apparent throughout is a profound commitment to diversity and plurality, which responded to loss, but also brought with it a great creative energy seen as necessary for moving Ireland into a new circumstance. There is the commitment also to the development of ideas about Ireland that could move from an atmosphere of the slowly decaying landscape of a social class and ways of life that were in decline to a place that had the possibility of being energized by new thought and options, even by democracy. That these decades constituted a moment, a movement, and a grouping worthy of special attention is reflected by Yeats in his somewhat pessimistic, if celebratory, Municipal Gallery Revisited. But where is the brush that could show anything of all that pride and that humility? And I am in despair that time may bring approved patterns of women or of men, but not that self-same excellence again. The introduction to this book contains a suggestion to us. The best of them impel us to imagine our futures as audaciously as they imagine theirs, the introduction tells us. If anything characterizes the era and the decades under review in this splendid book, if we wish to consider what inspired it, it is the belief of the participants that the gap could be closed between ideas and action, between the ideas of artists and the ideas of the wider community. The Ireland of that time was one still galvanized in its nationalism by the legacy and above all by the memory of the famine, an Ireland which saw in rapid succession the founding of the Land League, the Gaelic Athletic Association, and so many other literary organisations, the Gaelic League, as a generation of Irish men and women sought through such organisations to fashion an alternative Ireland and break the silence of a country devastated in recent times by famine and immigration. Events in Ireland, as I have said, were of course taking place in a global context, where a pinnacle of imperialist expansion and arrogance had been reached, and its unassailability was now under attack. The Boer War was widely viewed at home as an anti-imperial struggle, while the unfolding disaster that was the First World War that would claim a generation and the rhetoric that accompanied it also encouraged a perception that imperialism was drawing its final but life-demanding breath. It was against such a background that a revival began to emerge in Ireland, a revival that did not simply look backwards to a romanticised Ireland of Celtic myth and legend, but sought to achieve a recovery of intellectual and applied energy for the achievement of a cultural and political autonomy in a modern and forward-looking world. The late 19th and early 20th century was, in addition, a time of competing modernisms in an Ireland that was still under British rule, but an Ireland in which cultural nationalism had claimed a dominant place within a cultural revival soon to take hold and flourish. This literary renaissance of the time would come to shape a distinctive Irish literary culture, which sought to separate Irish writing from its British counterpart, exploring themes and styles that reflected our unique Irish concerns and cultures. The Abbey Theatre, first established as the Irish Literary Theatre Society, was founded to sow the seeds and reap the fruits of the revival. The manifesto of the Abbey Theatre, I quote, "to bring upon the stage the deeper emotions of Ireland," was a foundational text informing the national conversation that would, it was hoped, recraft our cultural and political landscape. The dramatic form played a key role in the revival, both in linking to the mythic past and in bringing Dublin and Ireland out into the world. During the window of time with which we are concerned this evening, the plays of Yeats, Synge, and Lennox Robinson, and later O'Casey shaped a new version of Irishness. As we can read in the section of the Handbook dedicated to theatre, developments in Irish theatre during this time were of global significance, as was acknowledged by, among others, Eugene O'Neill. Indeed, throughout its rich history, our national theatre, Arcla Náisiúnta, has sought to reflect and interrogate the concerns and preoccupations of a nation, even when they were shabby. As is the case today, the impact of the Abbey has always been based on the excellence of its artists and the genius of our writers. Key to the context of the great Irish revival was, of course, the decline of an ascendant class, which had for more than a century presided over both the political life and the cultural dimension of Irish society. Synge writes evocatively of the broken greenhouses and moth-eaten libraries slowly disintegrating in an Ireland determined to reclaim its independence and rediscover its heritage and culture. The introduction to this volume too suggests to us that in the subsequent ransacking of memory of this period by those who sought to establish a rationalized version of these decades, omission was as important as inclusion. The editors tell us, those who commemorated often sought to control the discourse in ways which made them the social successors. In that process, much was forgotten. Connolly's socialism, the dead in World War I, the role of radical women, the part played by the 1913 lockout. The book being launched this evening helps us. It makes good these exclusions from what were official versions that accommodated, as it were, those who would manage such exclusions. There was much that was contradictory, antithetical, and even disturbing about the extraordinary period in our narrative that was this narrative that was the Irish Revival, including the imagining and romanticizing of the land and property by those who were often most removed from it. Later, these issues of land and property would come to dominate independent Ireland, and together with a repressive pursuit of respectability and a captured and confined spirituality, would go on to claim an incredible price. As to literature itself, there were gaps of a social kind. William Butler Yeats's life experience was one lived apart from the people, as is captured in St. John Gogarty's anecdote about his adventure with Yeats to the exotic land of Toner's public house. Yeats' yearning for an idealized Inishfree stands too in stark contrast to the writing of, among others, Peig Sayers, in which the fields of rural Ireland are so often a focus of hardship and fierce destructiveness, and as I've written elsewhere, for whom electricity would come late to straighten women's backs. Whilst both views are founded in their own reality, this contradiction reminds us of Edward Seed's assertion that Yeats was a poet who belongs to a tradition not usually considered his, that of the colonial world, ruled by European imperialism now. But then Seed added that he appears to me, and I am sure to many others, to belong to the other cultural domain. The achievement is to be able to, on the one hand, be faithful to collective memory and experience, and on the other, to lodge one's creativity within the form that is hegemonic of one's time. It is the achievement of the writer from within the colonized, invited, as it were, to the literary parlor of the colonizer. Seed ascribes to Yeats the role of inspiring the anti-imperialist work of Neruda, Chaucer, and Darwish, suggesting that it was Yeats who first identified how the colonized can respond to empire without a disabling bitterness, and go on to address its contradictions while retaining its peculiar creativity, its possibilities for creativity. Indeed, inasmuch as he occupied a standpoint on the margins of Irish identity, Yeats's poetry had to dig deepest of all to source the imaginative wells of ancient Ireland, following his insistence that, I quote, Ireland should retain its culture by keeping awake its consciousness of metaphysical questions. Yeats nevertheless sees imagination not simply as a tool of memory, but as a powerful means of access to the unborn possibilities of humanity and the human spirit. Yeats's vision was of a future Ireland founded on wonder and beauty, but built by imagination and the garnering of possibility. The project he took up was at once a utopian one, but also one that was public in nature, as would be evidenced in his own statement that his Nobel Prize was an award to Ireland and a recognition of the project of independence. Yeats and his allies, colleagues and friends who populate this book were proudly committed to the public world and to the Irish people, past, present and future. Language is a key theme and a major concern of the revival, of course, with the removal from power of those who had upheld a particular form of intellect and culture, in some respect founded on the quenching of an indigenous culture and language. New questions arose as to the positioning of our vernacular in a revived Ireland. For example, should that vernacular, which was now to be promoted, be viewed as a bridge back towards our ancient culture, or should it be perceived as an impediment to a necessary moving forward towards the cosmopolitan thinking of a modern Europe? Many ardently sought to ensure the preservation of and to stimulate pride in and interest in a national language, which after many years of British rule and the stealthy inroads of Anglicisation into our culture had, in the words of Douglas Hyde, made young men and women blush and hang their heads when overhead speaking their own language. The contradiction of envisioning and building a culturally independent Ireland through the medium of the English language was widely debated, as was the wisdom of abandoning a language that strongly connected us to a modern, plural, and diverse Europe that offered so much in promise. Throughout the readings in the Handbook, there is an impressive sense of a connection between intellectual work rooted in Irish experience and reality, but also influenced by the philosophical and literary work of Europe and beyond. It was a generous vision, a wide scholarship, one that acknowledged the contribution and classical sources of the peoples of Europe and beyond. It stands in such contrast to those dark moments of our contemporary times, when entire peoples and their elected representatives can be denigrated in official discourse, and when there appears to be such little reference to the unifying capacity of a common cultural heritage and in the diversity of cultures that is truly human. I very much hope that this great collection of readings will inspire a new generation to further explore the writings, teachings, and thoughts of those whose work is gathered together in what is an inspirational publication. I spoke earlier of how the writings included in this book spoke of harnessing our past to our future possibilities. The work in Handbook of the Revival enables us to make a journey back to an intellectual atmosphere that is also an engaged one, encouraging us in our time not to be merely the passive recipients of either a narrow and impoverishing set of political assumptions as to what our shared nation's achievements and prospects are, or what indeed our European Union might be. It is appropriate that we be reminded of the importance of intellectually engaged work and its essential nature as the bedrock of a healthy democracy. There can be no doubt that we have recently been through a very painful period ourselves, during which many people suffered greatly. It has been a time when once again that has plunged Irish citizens into a great aftershock characterized by that old phenomenon, emigration. There has been a loss of trust in institutions which once seemed unassailable. In a number of speeches since my inauguration and since I gave that lecture to which Fiach McNeill refers, in those speeches at home and abroad, I have made the case for a pluralist scholarship, a remolded intellectual and practical engagement to deliver that pluralist scholarship. Yes, we in our generation are challenged to combine the best of emancipatory thought that will reintegrate issues of economy, ecology, and ethics. And we will not be thanked for settling for anything else. Yet one has to struggle for hope. One has to struggle to be optimistic. At times, as I have said, when we do not offer compassion to those with whom we share what we call our Europe, but often only joining in remarks that are quite shameful in their narrowness and in their condemnation. Our discourse now is not only inadequate, but it tends even to the undemocratic in its absence of inclusion in a discursive sense, even lacking in transparency as the gap widens between what is regarded as complex and instrumental on the one hand, and on the other, the necessary, inclusive conversation that is the mark of a discursive democracy. I spoke of this a few days ago when I rang Jürgen Habermas to congratulate him on his 86th birthday. A lonely voice in the European discourse, asking only that we express the best of our vision in relation to what we can share together. In recent times, this gap to which I refer has spawned the use even of stereotypically based generalizations against other peoples that are not only intellectually lazy, but also unacceptable in moral terms as the discourse of the shared members of a union that is in the throes of recovery from a failure of its guiding hegemonic paradigms. We, the peoples of Europe and the world, are capable of so much more, and our collective imagination must enable the creation and the delivery of new possibilities as we move forward to a more self-aware and participatory future. A future where we reconnect with that which is truly human, and yes, utopian, and yes, visionary, where new ideas are given life in the public space, and a role for the state is accepted for delivering the normative aspirations of the people it serves, and that for that there is once again a respect that has been lost in recent decades. I am well aware that among other European scholars, that wonderful one to whom I have referred, Jürgen Habermas, has been inviting us to a discussion of how we can craft into being a new form of transnationalism that allows the peoples of Europe to retain their specific normative achievements while embracing new shared competencies on issues for which we need to share in that space between ethics, economy, and ecology. And yet, while leaving decision-making within a deliberative democracy, and of course a final deciding role for the elected representative of the people. We need such a new conversation in our European Union, one that connects the people of Europe, their representatives and their institutions. They are complex, those conversations that we must have. They reflect a complex society with a complex set of problems. And just as the pieces in the handbook I launch reflect the contradictions and conflicts of the period which inspired the great Irish revival in the late 19th and early 20th century, what all the writings in the volume we launched this evening share is a willingness to engage, to converse, to dispute, and to navigate a path forward that is inclusive of all citizens in their diversities and in their similarities. The publication stands as an inspiring invitation to all of us Irish and Europeans, global citizens, to become part of a new national conversation and engagement on how to craft more solid foundations on that which to source our shared present and our imagined future. We must now rise to the challenge of pluralist scholarship and engagement in democratic debate. I have been honored to have been asked to launch this volume. I congratulate Professors Declan Kiberd and P.J. Mathews, Tres Liam Lub, Osach and Made the Targenta Akasan, E. once and Laura Talancho and Noct, a trin on Ober Eliatar Shulaka, level intellectual Akas foiled on pop pipely. I must think that this evening you will see in this book an outstanding achievement in preserving and presenting evidence of some of the most important of those conversations which have shaped and influenced 21st century Ireland, and which were lost to us until they now appear between the covers of this book. These editors, Professors Kiberd and Mathews, have provided us with an anthology, which I hope will remind us that a national identity is a constant work in progress, a flux, a project to which each generation must make its own contribution as active citizens rather than passive consumers marooned in some uncritical siding of human experience. ber bannacht gramach.